Okay, we're going to go through our quarterback, tight end, and defense rankings. So we'll talk about streaming options at every position. Starting off tight end, there's really not much to talk about with the tier 1 guys. Kelsey looks like he may be the tight end 1 yet again with the Rashee Rice injury. Obviously, the expanded target share. 9 targets this past week. This game going up against the New Orleans Saints. You have a 24-point implied team total. And somebody has to catch the ball here. I don't know if we're going to see a ton of volume for Xavier Worthy. I'm going over to Trey McBride. McBride has been at practice all week. Looks like he is trending towards being good to go this week. Now, with that being said, McBride was my tight end 1 before the Rashee Rice injury. This matchup going up against the Niners will be a tough one. And then also George Kittle in this game. Kittle's at the very top of fantasy points per game at the tight end position this year. But with that being said, he has missed practice both on Wednesday and Thursday. So his availability for that Friday practice will be a key thing to look out for. Should be a great matchup to play the Cardinals, where you have the highest implied team total of the NFL with 28.5 points for this Niners offense. Going down to our next tier, Brock Bowers was at the very top of these tight end rankings a week ago. As soon as you have no Devontae Adams, I want to say, okay, well, everything is going to get funneled through Brock Bowers in this offense. What we actually get is a massive game for Trey Tucker. What we actually get is 10 targets going to Jacoby Myers, and Bowers really does not do much for 2 straight weeks now. But looking at the underlying volume, Brock Bowers so far this season has had 24 targets. He's averaging 6 targets a game. One of the most impressive talents that we have in the game. You saw that with the prospect profile coming out of Georgia. He hasn't scored a receiving touchdown so far this year, which is definitely a disappointing thing. And honestly, I'd love to say, oh yeah, the touchdowns are coming. The volume is there. But to be honest, the Raiders offense has the lowest implied team total in the NFL this week with only 17 points. So it is tough to go all in and assume that Bowers is going to start scoring touchdowns. Now, Dalton Kincaid is a tight end that maybe will move up these rankings just a bit if you have no Khalil Shakir. Kincaid sees a season high 7 targets, a season high 5 receptions, and the season high 47 receiving yards this past week against the Baltimore Ravens. Playing the Houston Texans here, this should be a very close game where the spread on this game is about 2.5 points. And Shakir has missed practice both on Wednesday and Thursday. So no Shakir maybe opens up another target or 2 in this game for Kincaid in Houston. Now going over to our next guy, we are going to be looking at Jake Ferguson. Ferguson is set up to absolutely smash with volume. Over the past 2 weeks, Ferguson has had a total of 18 targets. You have no Brandon Cooks in this offense. And really, outside of CeeDee Lamb, there is no target competition whatsoever. Going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Steelers are actually favored in this game. We know the Dallas Cowboys defense suffered a multitude of injuries this past week. And right now, sportsbooks are saying that the Cowboys defense is going to regress. You may have to have more passing attempts for Dak Prescott in the second half. Ferguson looks like he's going to take a ton of those attempts, and you are going to get the cheap reception volume for your full PPR format. Now, of course, I am very confident that Dak Prescott is at least going to have 1 yard this Sunday. And if you're confident with that as well, you can actually find a Dak Prescott higher, lower, more than less than half a total yard pick on Underdog Fantasy for this Sunday if you are new. If you use promo code FLOCK, you will also get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And with promo code FLOCK, you'll be getting a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't mind going with the Jake Ferguson higher than 4.5 receptions this week, just because it's a spot with no Cooks, with a lot of passing volume. Like I said, I do think you have those cheap receptions. Now, dropping down to our next tight end, we are going to be looking at Tucker Kraft. Not only is Tucker Kraft a top 10 tight end for me this week, Tucker Kraft will be a top 10 tight end for me rest of season. Sadly, yes, we had no Jordan Love in this offense in weeks 2 and 3. So we really can throw those games out the window and only look at weeks 1 and 4 for what you've had with Kraft. Week 4, you had 9 targets. Week 1, you had 3 targets, averaging 6 targets a game with Jordan Love under center. And going into the future, you have no Christian Watson in this offense this week. And at the same time, Romeo Doubs is banged up as well. While Jaden Reed looks like he is set up to absolutely smash in this environment, Jaden Reed has only had 18% of the Green Bay Packers targets this year. It's not like Jaden Reed is that Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb level target earner. He's not a true alpha wide receiver. So I think the ball's going to continue to get spread around in Green Bay as we've always seen it. And Kraft is in a great offense and has the consistent target volume as long as the passing volume's there with Jordan Love. Now, going over to our next tier, I actually just picked up Pat Freiermuth in the Flock League. I'm going to have to play him with the Sam Laporta bye. Going up against the Dallas Cowboys, Pat Freiermuth's coming off the strongest week that he's had all year. You've had a season high 7 targets, a season high 5 receptions, season high 57 receiving yards, season high 16.5 fantasy points. The passing environment in Pittsburgh is the main reason that this happened, where you finally had a ton of passing attempts for Justin Fields, where obviously the Steelers did fall behind and have to throw the ball in the second half. There's a chance that that does happen in this game with the spread being extremely close. And Freiermuth actually has seen both 75% of snaps played in week 4 and in week 3. So yeah, the usage is up for Freiermuth, and this may be a game where the passing volume is respectable in Pittsburgh. Now, going over to Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet was a tight end that I thought was going to let a lot of people down last week. So yes, I may or may not have said to play Mark Andrews instead. Let's ignore that. But yeah, the reason we are off of Kmet is if you were looking at the addition of Keenan Allen, plus the natural regression that you were going to have in this offense for the Chicago Bears passing volume, it was clear like down spot for Kmet, but Kmet's still the same guy he was. He actually saw a season high 90% of the snaps this past week in Chicago. So he looks like he's an every down player for the Bears. Just a lot of wide receiver names. And it's not like we can sit here and say Caleb Williams is going to have 300 passing yards each and every week. Now, our next tight end will be David Njoku. So David Njoku was at practice on Wednesday. David Njoku was at practice on Thursday. Njoku did miss the past 3 weeks. It seems like David Njoku is set up to play the Washington Commanders. Should be a decent matchup. Going back to week 1, obviously David Njoku got injured, but in those 37% of snaps that he played for the Cleveland Browns offense, he saw 5 targets. He had 4 receptions. Going back to the end of last season, David Njoku was an absolute smash league-winning tight end. Now, obviously, we're going to assume that the passing volume is a little bit less here with Deshaun Watson in comparison to what it was with Joe Flacco. But with that being said, I would start David Njoku's first week back. Zach Ertz will be our next guy. Zach Ertz, super boring option, has averaged 4 targets a game, every game over the past 3 weeks. Full PPR format, you're going to get a floor. You'll have a severely capped ceiling, but at least you know you can kind of pencil in 6, 7, 8 fantasy points, which is hard to say with a lot of these other tight ends. Evan Ingram obviously was at practice Wednesday. Evan Ingram was at practice on Thursday. The reason we'll have Evan Ingram behind David Njoku here, as we go back to week 1, David Njoku crushed Ingram in a smaller amount of snaps. Evan Ingram actually got to play 68% of the snaps in this Jags offense week 1. The man face planted. He had 1 reception for 5 receiving yards. Going back to what you had with Evan Ingram in 2023, the larger sample does say this will be a high volume target earner. I actually think that he is the reason why you need to be just a little bit lower on Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. this week. I'm going over to what we have with Dalton Schultz. You had 5 targets back-to-back weeks. But honestly, as you add Tank Dell back in, I think the volume's going to come down for Schultz just a bit. And also, it's a tight end that has not had, more than 6.4 fantasy points all season. Our next guy will be Colby Parkinson. With Parkinson, back-to-back weeks here with 5+ targets. You have no Kupp, you have no Puka, so you will get flooded with targets. The issue is very similar to Zach Ertz, very similar to a lot of these guys. The ceiling's not there. The best game we've had is 7.3 fantasy points. But at least you know you're going to get production. If you start Mark Andrews, you have no idea what you're going to get. Andrews for back-to-back weeks now is giving you 0 fantasy points. Now, obviously, this is in the environment where the Ravens are just running the ball over and over and over again. This game against Cincinnati only has about a 2.5 point spread. So in this kind of environment, you shouldn't be surprised if we see some more passing volume in Baltimore than you would see otherwise. But to be honest with you, it's difficult to assume that Freiermuth is going to be anything at all centered around what the scheme is for this Baltimore Ravens offense. Tyler Conklin will be our next guy. Tyler Conklin actually had 8 targets last week, and with his 8 targets, he had 17 receiving yards. Obviously, very weird game environment. The thing this week is going up against the Minnesota Vikings, arguably the toughest matchup you're going to have this year. A 19-point implied team total for the Jets. I'm going over to Hunter Henry. Obviously, the massive blow up in week 2. Since then, 3 targets. Not interesting. Mike Gesicki only had 0.1 fantasy points this past week. You saw a season low 33% of the snaps. Isaiah Likely, after his first blow up week here, is sitting with a total of about 9 fantasy points on the past 3 weeks. Noah Fant this past week only played 57% of the snaps in Seattle. None of these tight ends are exciting. Let's move over to the quarterback position. With quarterbacks, we are going to be looking at Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen as the top 2 guys. Lamar will be the QB1 for me in the rankings this week. Lamar is averaging over 20 points per game. Lamar is really giving the safe environment where it doesn't matter if he falls behind like you had against the Chiefs week 1. There you had the 273 passing yards and the passing touchdown, plus 122 rushing yards because he had to drop back a ton. And even this past week, or 2 weeks ago, you have 15 passing attempts for Lamar Jackson. This is a team that just wants to run the ball over and over and over again. And in that environment, Lamar has 14 rushing attempts and the rushing touchdown. Super safe name. Josh Allen's been very up and down. You get 31 points, then 9 points, then 30 points, then 7 points. But very few players have the ceiling that you're going to see from Allen from a week-to-week perspective, knowing that the passing volume can be here at the same time. You can have 50 rushing yards and multiple rushing touchdowns. Now, going over to Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels would be our third option. You do only have a 23-point implied team total in Washington in comparison to these other two top guys. I mean, their offenses should be a little higher scoring. But, I mean, clearly Daniels has been one of the best real-life quarterbacks in the NFL so far through the first 4 weeks. And with Jaden Daniels at the same time, he is a rookie. Okay, he's been great. You would assume that a rookie's only going to continue to get better. I think that you can safely say that he's at least a top 4 quarterback rest of season in fantasy based off the rushing upside that you have, where right now he's averaging over 10 rushing attempts a game, being highly efficient with these as well. Daniels, absolutely crushing. I will just prefer probably Lamar and Allen for the larger sample that we have. Going over to Jordan Love. Jordan Love had 54 passing attempts last week. It's probably not going to happen again, right? But you are going up against the Los Angeles Rams, and you have an implied team total of 25.5 points. So sportsbooks are saying that it's going to be an extremely high-scoring offense. We know this Rams matchup is one that we want to target. Kyler Murray as our next quarterback. Kyler Murray was extremely high in my rankings last week. I thought it was a great matchup going up against the Washington Commanders. This week, it is a much worse matchup going up against what should be a pretty damn good San Francisco 49ers defense. I'll actually probably be starting the Niners defense. We'll talk about them in just 1 second. So I'm hoping that Kyler Murray doesn't do anything. But the reality is, you look at through the first 3 weeks, Kyler Murray was averaging over 50 rushing yards per game. With Kyler Murray as well, this past week, while it was a letdown, you did have no Trey McBride. So I think adding McBride back into this offense should open things up for Kyler just a bit. And we have seen the rushing ceiling as well. Joe Burrow will be our next guy. Joe Burrow over the past 2 weeks, or over the past 3 weeks, has had 7 passing touchdowns. Joe Burrow over the past 2 weeks has averaged about 250, 260 passing yards. Obviously, the issue is when you don't have the rushing upside, it's going to just be a little bit tougher to be super excited about you. I mean, if you look at the addition of Higgins in this offense, though, it does really look like it has opened everything up, where this offense has been so much better over the past 2 weeks. Tough matchup against the Ravens, but with that being said, probably you do have to throw the ball here if you're going to keep up. CJ Stroud will be our next quarterback. Looking at Stroud, we finally get the passing volume of over 300 passing yards this past week. Finally, it is there. I honestly think going into the future, this is in the range of outcomes for CJ Stroud every single week. You're going up against the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, this is one of the best defenses in the league. But with that being said, you add in Tank Dell, you have Nico Collins, you have Stephon Diggs. My personal belief is I think that CJ Stroud is a top 3 to 5 quarterback in the NFL today. You have a 23-point implied team total against Buffalo, and Mixon may miss. They may be forced to throw. Now, Patrick Mahomes will be our next quarterback 8. Going up against the New Orleans Saints, you have a 23-point total. This is higher than what you have, say, with the Houston Texans. But with that being said, Patrick Mahomes is not running the ball, and the Chiefs are not letting Mahomes drop back as much as we have seen in the past. This is a team that's trying to play good defense. It's a team that's trying to win the game by essentially playing keep away with the other team. Mahomes has yet to have 20 fantasy points in a single week. So even if the implied team total is relatively high for this Chiefs offense against the New Orleans Saints, it is tough to go all in based off the scheme that we've had, plus no Rice, plus no Hollywood. Now, Brock Purdy will be the quarterback that I'm probably starting in the Flock League this week. Looking at him, we know that you don't have a ton of rushing upside. 2 weeks ago, though, against the Rams, he did give you 41 rushing yards and 3 passing touchdowns as well. Going up against the Arizona Cardinals, this game has one of the highest totals of any game in the NFL this week. Should be extremely high scoring. Right now, the Niners are favored by about 6-7 points, favored by almost a touchdown here. So I think you can go ahead and you can just start Brock Purdy with the high floor, low ceiling based off the cap on rushing. Somebody that has no cap whatsoever and has an extremely high ceiling is Justin Fields. And I can already hear you in the comment section screaming at me saying, how is Mahomes ranked over Fields? Because, like we said, Mahomes not had a single game over 20 fantasy points this year. Whereas if you were looking at Justin Fields this past week gave you 32 points. We finally had the dropbacks. You had 44 total dropbacks for Fields, running the ball, 2 rushing touchdowns. You've had 2 games now with over 50 rushing yards. This is a banged up Dallas Cowboys defense. So honestly, Fields is set up to absolutely crush. You have to have him as a top 10 quarterback. If you wanted to push me to have him over Mahomes, I think you 100% could, but I have a lizard brain / monkey brain. They're kind of merged in together as one, and that's going to make it a hard call for me to rank Mahomes lower than Fields this week. But going over to Anthony Richardson. Obviously, I'm assuming that Anthony Richardson's going to play. Looking at A-Rich, you have an implied team total of 22 points going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So sportsbooks are saying that this is going to be one of the highest scoring games that the Colts have played all year. With that being said, you see the rushing upside. He only played 20% of the snaps for the Colts this past week before going down due to an injury. He had 24 rushing yards. You go so far through the course of the season, you remove that, past week, he's averaging about 40 rushing yards per game. You've had tough matchups, like you had to play Pitt, you had to play Chicago. Should be a good matchup going up against Jacksonville. I would assume if he is banged up, though, he probably runs the ball a little bit less, which is why I would rather have Fields. And then going over to Dak Prescott, you are missing Brandon Cooks. And I did call Dak Prescott the sell-high candidate after he dropped 30 points against the Baltimore Ravens with both the rushing touchdown and 379 passing yards. But to be honest with you, now I think Dak's in a really good spot to see consistent passing volume with the key injuries that you have to this Dallas Cowboys defensive line. I think the Dallas Cowboys may be forced to throw the ball in the second half. It's a tough matchup going up against Pittsburgh, but still. Now going over to Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold has been significantly better than Patrick Mahomes in fantasy football this year. And arguably, if you're box score scouting, Sam Darnold's been much better than Patrick Mahomes, just regardless. Going up against the Jets, it is a very tough matchup. You have an implied team total of 21.5 points here. Obviously, this should be a weird game environment. But I mean, looking at the touchdowns you've had this year, Sam Darnold currently leading the NFL in passing touchdowns. So I wouldn't mind at all if you want to say, Mason, F it, who cares about rushing upside? Who cares about a matchup? Who cares about a game environment? Let me just go ahead and take the guy that's leading the NFL in passing touchdowns, and you can do you. Trevor Lawrence has been absolutely booty cheeks. I mean, Lawrence has been one of the worst quarterbacks in fantasy football. The Jags are 0-4. Lawrence has yet to have 15 fantasy points in a single game. It's been disgusting. For whatever reason, sportsbooks are telling us that you have a spread of 2.5 points. The Jags are favored, and you have an implied team total of 24.5 points for this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Sportsbooks are saying this is going to be the best Jags offense that you've had over the past 4 weeks. Now, obviously, if you believe that, Lawrence is an interesting name to look at because we're not expecting everything to get funneled through the rushing attack and Travis Etienne here. But to be honest, he's been horrible. Geno, you could definitely play over him. And then, honestly, we probably should separate these tiers. We should probably have Caleb in the tier below with Caleb, Stafford, Dalton as names that I'm not super excited about. I know people are going to hate us for saying that about Andy Dalton. Obviously, Dalton over the past 2 weeks has been really good where he's averaged 20 fantasy points per game, but you have no rushing upside, and it's a really tough matchup going up against Chicago. Now, going over to our defenses, I want to reiterate, this is my first year playing with defenses in fantasy football since 2017. I'd exclusively played in leagues with no defense, no kicker from 2017 through really this season. So it's up to you if you want to listen to me on defenses. I mean, hell, it's up to you if you want to listen to me on anything, but I'm really letting you know I don't know what I'm doing here. Tier 1, I think the tier 1 defenses this week are the Broncos. The Broncos sitting here with the 4th most defensive points so far this year, depending on your scoring. Generated 12 sacks over the past 2 weeks, and it's a phenomenal matchup going up against the Raiders, where the Raiders have the lowest implied team total of any team in the NFL. The Vikings have been the best defense in the NFL this season in fantasy. I mean, you have so far a total of 17 sacks through 4 weeks. You're going up against the Jets, who only have an implied team total of 19 points. The Patriots defense has been whatever over the past 3 weeks. It's definitely been no bueno, but looking at this matchup against Miami, right now sportsbooks have Miami with an implied team total of 17. So yeah, the Dolphins supposed to be just as bad as the Raiders. Going over to Seattle. With Seattle, you're playing the Giants. The Giants potentially have no Malik Neighbors and no Devin Singletary. The Giants with no Malik Neighbors, I wouldn't be surprised if they pick up 2 first downs this entire game. And then the Kansas City Chiefs, I know that the New Orleans Saints obviously had a phenomenal offense through the first 2 weeks. But right now, sportsbooks are saying that the Saints have an implied team total of 18.5 points. They're saying the Saints are going to come back down to earth and the Chiefs are really going to be able to limit them. Y'all know, I've said this time and time again, I trust Las Vegas Sports. I trust sportsbooks. I think that they know more than I do. I think they know more than you do. I think they have more information than anybody. So yeah, if you have an incredibly low total for the Saints and the Chiefs have been okay against the Ravens, the Bengals, the Falcons, the Chargers, I think this should be great against the Saints. And then Miami will be our last defense here. Miami had a great matchup against Tennessee last weekend. Will Levis, what'd they do with it? They allowed 29 points. So I don't know. It's tough to rely on Miami, even if they're playing what is usually the worst offense in the NFL with the Patriots. Our next defense will be the Chicago Bears. The Bears have been a phenomenal defense so far this season. They are 5th in total points. You're going up against the Carolina Panthers. Panthers have been hot over the past 2 weeks. Panthers have an applied team total of 19.5. The Raiders are going up against the Denver Broncos. The Raiders have been a garbage defense so far this season. I mean, go back to when everybody started them against the Carolina Panthers, and they allowed 36 points and 437 yards. The Niners will be the defense that I am starting this week. The Niners have a tough matchup going up against the Arizona Cardinals. They are the 3rd best defense so far this season. They have been carrying my team. I mean, they carried me last week whenever we won against the New England Patriots offense. Obviously, very different situation with Kyler. But I'm still starting the Niners. I had the option to drop them and pick up a streamer, and I decided not to. I'm going down to our next tier. We're going to have the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Has been a great defense so far this year, obviously, against the Indianapolis Colts. They allow 27 points, 358 total yards. But against Dallas, they are favored in this game. I'm going over to the Jets. With the Jets, they've only allowed 13 points over the past 2 weeks. But you're going up against the Vikings. You are dogs. And Darnold is currently leading the NFL in passing touchdowns. The Washington Commanders here. The Commanders this past week were great against Arizona when I didn't expect them to be. 2 forced fumbles, 4 sacks. They have been one of the worst defenses so far in the NFL this season, but they get to play Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns. The Green Bay Packers going up against the Rams. Obviously, the Rams have had a ridiculous amount of injuries so far, and the Packers have been one of the best defenses in the NFL. So honestly, if I wasn't able to see sportsbook data, I would have the Packers so much higher than this. My only hesitation is the Rams have a 22.5 point implied team total. Vegas sportsbooks are saying the Rams and Sean McVay should be able to bounce back. The Baltimore defense will be our next one going up against Cincy. Probably not excited about it. And then, yeah, outside of that, just GG if you're trying to play any other defense. But I think that's all I got for you. Again, really do appreciate you and hope I was able to help you out with this video. And if you want to check out that Dak Prescott special pick, more than less than half a total yard on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description and comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy and make at least a $10 deposit, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. You're going to be getting that free Dak Prescott pick, and you are going to be getting a free team review in the live stream that we are hosting every single night. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog Fantasy account. That way we're able to go through and credit you with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you. Really hope I was able to help you out. I really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.